On this Monday night, things get testy at the Emergencies Act inquiry.
And you don't recall saying that you'll cut off Dave Springer's nuts and use them as bookends.
Blunt questions for Ottawa's former police chief and the claims he tried passing the buck over failures in policing the convoy. Breaking news, shots fired. Police investigate a deadly school shooting in Toronto. Russia's latest barrage on Ukraine. The ramifications for neighboring countries. Indicted, the new charges against the BC man accused of violently attacking Nancy Pelosi's husband. And modernizing Remembrance Day.
It's been a few years in the making.
Fresh ways to honor service and sacrifice.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The former chief of Ottawa's police service was defending his reputation today at the inquiry into whether the use of the Federal Emergencies Act earlier this year was warranted. In February, protesters were allowed to occupy the nation's capital for weeks. The so-called Freedom Convoy ended after the Emergencies Act was invoked. Ottawa's former police chief, Peter Sloly, quit in mid-February after concerns about his lack of leadership. And today, evidence was put before the inquiry that he feared being blamed and sometimes crudely threatened those who may have been getting in his way. David Akin has our top story tonight.
Do you remember that?
Again, I don't even know what day you're on right now.
I said February 9th.
The clashes were frequent and tense.
You were pretty concerned that you would lose your job and be blamed for what had happened.
Absolutely not, sir.
The lawyer for the Ottawa Police Force spent the morning grilling Peter Sloly, the Ottawa Police Chief, who resigned midway through last winter's occupation.
And what you were looking for was to blame somebody else.
Absolutely not, sir.
And yet, the evidence shows that Sloly, while he was chief and while the protesters were on Parliament Hill, was clearly concerned about his own reputation. Navigator, a public relations firm, was hired by the police to monitor media mentions of the chief and provide communications advice. The bill, more than $180,000 for 2 weeks' work. In a memo Sloly wrote at the time, Sloly complained about the personal agendas of some of his subordinates, saying he was dealing with, quote, undermining cliques and camps within his force. A letter from the City of Ottawa's lawyer was entered as evidence in which the lawyer writes he was worried Sloly was scheming to blame city officials, not police, for being unable to clear the convoy.
It's an alarming assertion made by the council for the city and absolutely incorrect.
The commission heard testimony from one of Sloly's deputies that at one meeting, Sloly used salty language to threaten an OPP inspector named Dave Springer if Springer got in his way.
And you don't recall saying that you'll cut off Dave Springer's nuts and use them as bookends.
And use them as bookends? No, sir. I don't recall saying that.
Time and again, Sloly said he could not recall or could not remember things that other Ottawa police and OPP officers noted in writing at the time. Sloly was particularly harsh in his assessment of Ottawa's deputy police chief, Trish Ferguson. She's the one who made that note about that crude comment.
My evidence, Commissioner, is that her extreme editorial license that she took was extremely problematic for me and reflects on her, not on me.
Sloly did say, though, that in his 30 years of municipal policing, the Freedom Convoy that he confronted was what he called a true threat to national security. Donna?
David, we've heard almost exclusively, David, from police so far in these hearings. There's a long list of witnesses still to go, including the Prime Minister. What can we expect for the rest of the week?
Well, for the rest of the week, we get to the protesters themselves, the leaders of the convoy, many of whom are still awaiting criminal trials related to their convoy activities. And those leaders, those witnesses, will include Tamara Leach, Chris Barber, BJ Dichter, and Pat King. As for the Prime Minister, well, he and some of his senior cabinet ministers, they're going to be among the last group of witnesses.
All right. David Akin in Ottawa. Thanks, David. To breaking news in Toronto. There's been a shooting outside a high school. Police say one person is dead. A second person, a teenage boy, is in the hospital. The school was placed under lockdown. The suspect was last seen fleeing the scene. Global's Brittany Rosen is there tonight. Brittany, what more can you tell us?
Good evening, Donna. Well, this remains a very active scene outside of Woburn Collegiate Institute in Scarborough as police continue to investigate this brazen daylight Halloween shooting that quickly turned fatal. They continue to have really the whole property cordoned off, and it's believed that the shooting happened at the front of the school in the parking lot. Now, what we can tell you at this point is that 2 teenage boys are among the victims. One of them had life-threatening injuries. He was rushed to hospital where he later succumbed to his injuries. The other teenage boy actually walked into a hospital with a gunshot wound, and he was transferred to a trauma center via emergency run. Now, witnesses and students that we spoke to here on scene say that this may have stemmed from a confrontation involving students from other schools. So as a result of all of this, students here at Woburn Collegiate Institute were placed into lockdown. They were in lockdown for roughly 40 minutes. At this point, what we know about the suspect is that he fled the scene wearing a black jacket and a COVID mask. Police say at this point they haven't made any arrests when it comes to the suspect. However, there is no threat to public safety. But certainly, Donna, this was a frightening day for students and parents alike. And I should also mention that this is the second school shooting here at Woburn Collegiate to happen within this past year. I'll send it back to you.
Brittany Rosen at the scene of a school shooting in Scarborough. Thanks, Brittany. The war of words between Ontario education workers and the provincial government is heating up. The government of Premier Doug Ford has announced new anti-strike legislation ahead of a planned walkout on Friday. The province intends to impose a new contract and fine education workers up to $4,000 a day should they strike. CUPE, which represents 55,000 educational assistants, early childhood educators, and custodians, is vowing to fight the new legislation. And the union representing Ontario elementary school teachers also walked away from contract talks with the government today. In British Columbia, a new payment model for doctors is being introduced to try to tackle the province's ongoing shortage of family doctors. Under the agreement, a full-time family doctor could earn up to $385,000 a year, up from $250,000 under the old funding model. Doctors will be able to opt out of the current fee-for-service system, and the payment model is intended to cover much of the overhead involved in running a family practice. About 1 million people in BC do not have a family doctor. It's hoped this will help retain existing doctors and recruit new ones, plus better integrate healthcare services.
This brand new model takes into account 5 factors, including the time a doctor spends with a patient, the number of patients a doctor sees in a day, the number of patients a doctor supports through their office, the complexity of the issues a patient is facing, and administrative costs currently paid directly by family doctors.
The BC government will also launch a province-wide database to try to match people with a general practitioner. To the war in Ukraine now, Russia launched a fresh wave of attacks across the country today. And while Ukraine says a number of the missiles were intercepted, others did hit their targets, knocking out critical infrastructure and cutting off power and water to many, including in the capital, Kyiv. As Crystal Goomansingh reports, power cuts are the new normal as winter looms.
With morning temperatures in the single digits, people waited outside to get water from emergency filling stations in Kyiv. We can stand in line. They, the Russians, says this 74-year-old, wouldn't be able to handle this. Attacks on critical infrastructure in the capital and right across the country prompted early morning rocket warning sirens and a flurry of activity for utility crews.
Experts right now working, and we hope we fix the problem in the next couple of hours.
It seems as fast as repairs are made, systems are knocked out. Ukraine's prime minister noted the attacks hit 18 mostly energy-related facilities. In Kharkiv, one such strike left people sitting in the dark on metro trains. The latest barrage of missile strikes followed a weekend Ukrainian drone attack on Russian vessels in the Black Sea. Video appearing to show the strike popped up on social media. Russia reported damage to one warship. The vessels, according to Russia, were in the Crimean port as a part of the deal to guarantee the safety of shipments carrying Ukrainian grain, fertilizers, and other food products. Russia has pulled out of that agreement, prompting concerns about food security. Moldova, meanwhile, has been dragged into the conflict. The deputy prime minister tweeted that debris from a missile intercepted by Ukraine caused damage in a northern border village, writing, "The shockwave shattered windows on several residential houses." He added, "The appalling strike on critical infrastructure reverberates beyond Ukraine's borders and pose a threat direct to Moldova's energy and human security." Norwegian officials, meanwhile, say Russia's invasion of Ukraine poses the most serious security situation in Europe in decades. As a precaution, Norway put its military on a raised alert level effective November 1st. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
The Canadian government says the first of 39 made-in-Canada light armoured vehicles have begun arriving in Europe, destined for Ukraine. That's on top of 100 Canadian-made armoured personnel carriers already on the ground there. Here's the Defence Minister in an exclusive interview with Global News.
What we are providing to Ukraine are brand new vehicles, fresh off the line, to make sure that Ukraine has best-in-class technology.
There are questions, though, about whether this contribution meets Ukraine's needs and whether Canada is a leader in manufacturing armoured vehicles. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson has a reality check.
On the front lines in Ukraine, the life-saving value of armoured vehicles made clear. A Russian mine strike on Ukrainian troops with no injuries or deaths. In a war that has seen heavy munitions and mine strikes kill many, the protection offered by armoured vehicles is in high demand. Canada has stepped up by pledging 39 armoured vehicles manufactured by General Dynamics Land Systems Canada and another 8 armoured personnel carriers from Ontario-based Rochelle. Defence Minister Anita Anand says the government wants to become a leader in NATO in providing vehicles to Ukraine, an angle the Canadian government has also been pumping behind closed doors with allies. But how realistic is that promise?
Armoured vehicles, land vehicles are a key focus of the defence industrial base in Canada, and I think so it's no accident that that's one of the things we ended up sending to Ukraine.
Perry said armoured vehicles are a logical choice for Canada, but with an important caveat. The government would have to act quickly and make significant investments in order to deliver on the promise.
There's no timeline, no context.
Mark Popov, who led armoured combat teams in Afghanistan, says he's dubious the minister can make good on her statements.
Canada simply does not have the ability to manufacture mass amounts of armoured vehicles and become a world leader in this compared to our own NATO allies.
Canada would likely need other countries to set aside their national interest in defence contractors and agree to buy Canadian instead. It's not clear if that will happen, and the Canadian government would need to commit a lot more than a few dozen vehicles to help Ukraine.
That requires sort of policy follow-through and a constant provision, and thus far they haven't shown a great track record of that.
There is, however, a twist in all of this. While funding for armoured vehicles plays well in boat-rich ridings where they're manufactured in Canada, it could also delay how quickly the Canadian Army gets its own equipment. Donna?
Mercedes, thanks. A group claiming it is going to save America. Coming up, what's behind a movement in Florida gaining momentum? The economy, abortion rights, and immigration are dominating debates in the lead up to the midterm elections in the U.S. And so is something else: lies. The mistaken belief that the 2020 election was stolen and that Joe Biden is not the legitimate president has taken hold among millions of Americans, fueled by former President Donald Trump and his supporters. Jackson Prosco traveled to the heart of Trump country, Florida, and tonight he looks at a political movement that claims to be on a mission to save America.
Welcome to the Villages, an affluent retirement community where golf carts rule the road and where many residents are still working to re-elect Donald Trump.
Why Donald Trump?
Because I think he's the best president we've ever had in my lifetime, and I'm 70 years old, and I want him back.
Valerie Jameson leads the Villages MAGA Club.
I felt really safe and secure in this country, and I don't feel that way at all anymore.
Like most Republicans, she's adamant the last election was stolen.
Because there's no way Biden would have won without it being stolen.
Why do you say that?
Because you see how he is?
She's also convinced there's no way Democrats can legitimately win future elections, including the midterms.
They are the enemy.
These are your fellow Americans.
I don't care who they are. They can be American, they can be from another country, but if they have the kind of views that the left has, I don't trust them.
Do you have friends who are Democrats?
My mother and my sister.
And what's that like?
I don't speak politics to them at all, ever.
Valerie is hardly alone, especially here. At a rally for Republican Senator Marco Rubio, the top issue was taking back power, in language that's increasingly dire.
Our government is Marxist from the core.
You honestly believe that?
I do. I know it. Believe it. It's the truth.
Do you think these elections will be fair and legitimate?
Not all. No.
If the rhetoric sounds dangerous, that's because it is. Democrats and Republicans fear violence, based largely around Trump's election lies.
If those people remain in power, they will destroy the country.
Senator Rubio recently claimed without evidence that one of his campaign staff was the victim of a politically motivated attack. That was just days before the husband of Speaker Nancy Pelosi was brutally assaulted at home.
What can you as a political leader do to dial down the temperature?
Well, it's illegal. I mean, I've never asked anyone to go out and attack anybody. And the line in which you say, and everyone who votes for the other side is evil and dangerous, and they're all need to be destroyed, and they're a danger to the country, that invites violence.
Back on the road,
some of us have thought of actually leaving the country.
Trump supporters like Valerie make no apologies for their views.
Most people are on the same page we are.
Valerie believes the stakes are so high that only one man can save her country, even if he isn't on the ballot right now.
So what do you think the Republican Party looks like if Donald Trump decides not to run in 2024?
I think we're doomed.
Whether or not Trump makes a comeback, he has come to define a movement that sees only one path forward for America. Jackson Prosco, Global News, The Villages, Florida.
The man accused of attacking Nancy Pelosi's husband in his home has been charged with assault and attempted kidnapping. 42-year-old David DePape was arrested on Friday and faces 50 years in prison if convicted. State charges of attempted homicide and elder abuse, among others, are still pending. Paul Pelosi was attacked inside with a hammer. He suffered a fractured skull and is recovering from surgery. Police say DePape claimed he wanted to kneecap Nancy Pelosi, who wasn't home at the time, and take her hostage, and that duct tape and zip ties were found in the house. The attack raises questions of security and safety in the lead up to the midterm elections. Intelligence agencies warn a rise in domestic terrorism could lead to a spike in violence. We'll have full coverage next week from Washington, D.C. as Americans head to the polls. I will be live from the Capitol looking at some of the factors influencing this election. Trapped in the happiest place on earth ahead, what China's strict COVID policies mean for Shanghai Disney. People in South Korea are angry, grieving, and demanding answers after Saturday's deadly crowd surge during Halloween celebrations in Seoul. 154 people were killed in the crush. More than 100 of the victims were in their 20s. 26 foreign nationals died. 149 others, including a Canadian, were injured. The huge crowd pushed through a narrow neon-lit alleyway, trapping and crushing people. Investigators are combing through security camera footage to find the exact cause of the stampede. A national period of mourning has been declared. Families and friends who lost loved ones want to know why police sent only 137 officers to try to control a crowd of more than 100,000 people. Visitors to Disneyland in Shanghai, China, were locked inside the park gates as part of that country's latest round of strict COVID-19 lockdowns. Videos posted to social media show lots of people trying to get out before the gates were fully closed. Once they were shut, people were told they would not be able to leave the park unless they tested negative for COVID-19. The restrictions were imposed as part of China's zero COVID policy after 10 cases of the virus were confirmed in Shanghai on Saturday. Innovating tributes next, how this year's poppies are bringing more meaningful ways to honor those who served. Remembrance Day is approaching, and among the ways to honor the fallen is, of course, to donate to the Legion, get a poppy, and wear it in the lead up to Remembrance Day. We've all been doing it for years. This year, there's something slightly different. As Mike Armstrong explains, a new batch of poppies carry deeper tributes, plus a touch of sustainability.
The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in downtown Ottawa on the morning of November 11th will look very different. It will be decorated with the small flower that's been a symbol of remembrance for Canadians for 101 years, a way of honoring those who served and sacrificed. At the end of each Remembrance Day ceremony at the National War Memorial, celebrants lay their poppies on the tomb. It's one of the most emotional moments of the day. Well, the touching symbolism isn't changing, but there may be a slightly different feeling to the touch.
It's been a few years in the making.
Nujma Bond is a spokesperson for the Royal Canadian Legion and says for the first time, new poppies are biodegradable. The Legion distributes 18 to 20 million poppies each year. That's a lot of plastic. Well, not anymore. They're now being made of paper and cotton velvet. The wreaths are being changed as well.
The wreaths are also biodegradable this year, so they're also a mix of different things like real moss and bamboo and some plaster.
Now, something else that's new this year is online. The Legion has a website for cell phones, poppystories.ca. You simply scan a poppy and it gives you the history of someone who served. In this case, Canadian Grenadier Guard Sergeant Mo Hurwitz. He was a hockey player from Montreal, decorated for heroism in the Second World War, and killed at just 25. The Legion has dozens of life stories up and will add more in the years to come.
We really hope that people will make that personal connection to a name, to a face, think about their life, think about how similar they are to you and I.
Now, this is an important part of the year for the Legion. The Poppy campaign generates about $20 million, money that's used to support veterans and their families. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Ottawa.
Get a poppy. And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is this pumpkin patch in Saanich, BC, looking a little spooky. Happy Halloween to all of you out and about tonight, and thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.